The amalgamation legacy, Nigeria's enduring question. If you ask most Nigerians when their country was born, they'll probably tell you October 1st, 1960, Independence Day, a day of celebration, of new beginnings, of a nation finally taking control of its own destiny. But what if I told you that's not the real beginning of the story? What if the real story starts almost 50 years earlier, not with a celebration, but with a stroke of a pen in a colonial office? The date was January 1st, 1914. And on that day, a British administrator named Sir Frederick Lugard signed a document that merged two vast, completely different territories into one. He called it Nigeria. This wasn't an act of nation building. It was an act of accounting. And in doing so, he created something of a monster, a kind of colonial Frankenstein, stitched together from parts that didn't fit, without asking any of the people who lived there if they wanted to be part of this experiment. And the ghost of that decision, it haunts Nigeria to this day. From a devastating civil war to the fight over oil and the calls for separation you see in the news, it all traces back to this single moment. This is the story of the mistake of 1914 and how a country is still trying to live with the consequences. So, to understand just how radical this 1914 merger was, you have to picture what was there before. This wasn't an empty land. It was a mosaic of ancient and sophisticated societies. Up the north, you have the massive Sokoto Caliphate, a highly organized Islamic empire ruled by emirs under a sultan. It was hierarchical, deeply religious, and its trade route looked north across the Sahara Desert. Then you travel south and everything changes. In the west, you find the Yoruba kingdoms, like Oyo and Ife. They were complex constitutional monarchs. The king, the Oba, had power, but he wasn't a dictator. Powerful councils of chiefs could and did keep him in check. And if you go further east, you find the Igbo people, and their society was something else entirely. Mostly, they didn't have kings or chiefs at all. They lived in decentralized, Republican-styled villages where decisions were made by the community through consensus. It was democratic, egalitarian, and fiercely individualistic. So you have a feudal Islamic empire, constitutional monarchies, and democratic villages. Different religions, different legal systems, different ideas about what power even is. And the British looked at all of this incredible diversity and decided to just smash it all together. Why? Well, the reason was simple and not very romantic. It was money. You see, the Northern Protectorate was landlocked. It had no port, which meant it couldn't collect custom duties from the trade, the main source of cash for the British Empire. So the North was constantly in debt, needing a bailout from London every year. And Southern Protectorate, on the other hand, was rich. With its port and vibrant trade in palm, oil, cocoa, it had a huge budget surplus. For the British Colonial Office, this was just bad business. Why run two administrations, one that makes money and one that loses it? The solution was simple bookkeeping. Merge them. Let the South's money pay the North's bill. The Colonial Secretary at the time even called it a marriage between a rich wife, the South, and a poor husband, the North. But it was a forced marriage. Nobody from the North or the South was consulted. It was a decision made thousands of miles away for the convenience of the empire, and it created a permanent economic structure. Take the wealth from where it's produced in the South and send it to a central government to be shared out. Remember that part. It becomes very important later. Now, you might think that after forcing this union, the British would try to, unify people, create a shared identity, but they did the exact opposite. Their policies basically poured concrete into the cracks they'd already created. Their main strategy was called indirect rule. Sounds gentle, but its effect was explosive. In the North, it worked perfectly for them. They just ruled through the existing emirs, propping up their power and preserving the traditional conservative society. They even deliberately limited the influence of Christian missionaries and Western education to avoid rocking the boat. But in the South, especially in the Igbo East, it was a disaster. There were no chiefs to rule through. So the British just appointed them. They created a new class of warrant chiefs. These men often had no traditional legitimacy. They were seen as corrupt puppets, and people deeply resented them. So, in one part of the country, you strengthen the old order, in another, you shatter it. And it gets worse. The British actively played a game of divide and rule. The biggest tool they used was education. Because of the missionaries, the South quickly developed a large Western educated elite. Lawyers, doctors, journalists. The North, which had been deliberately shielded from this, lagged far behind. This created massive suspicion. The educated Southerners saw the Northerners as backward. The Northern elite feared the Southerners would use their education to dominate everything. Then came the final piece of political engineering. The British divided Nigeria into 3 big regions: North, West, and East. Each one was built around one of the 3 largest ethnic groups, the Hausa Fulani, the Yoruba, and the Igbo. And they drew the map so that the northern region was bigger in land and population than the other 2 combined. In a democracy, that means the North would always have the advantage. They basically hardwired ethnic competition into the political system. To get power, you don't appeal to Nigerians, you appealed to your tribe. The stage was set for a tragedy. When Nigeria became independent in 1960, that ticking time bomb didn't take long to go off. The First Republic was a mess of political rigging, census fraud, and escalating ethnic tensions. The North controlled the federal government, and many of the South felt completely shut out. Then, in 1966, it all fell apart. A group of young army officers, mostly Igbo, staged a coup. They killed the prime minister, the northerner, and the premier of the North. They said they were fighting corruption. But to many, especially in the North, the pattern of killing looked like an Igbo takeover. 6 months later, Northern officers launched a counter coup. And what followed was horrific. Across the North, organized massacres, pogroms were unleashed against Igbo civilians. Tens of thousands were murdered in cold blood. Their homes and businesses were destroyed. It was a frenzy of ethnic cleansing. Over 1 million terrified Igbo people fled back to their ancestral homeland in the East, carrying stories of imaginable brutality. For the people of the East, that was the final straw. The social contract was broken. The Nigerian state had failed to protect them. In fact, it had participated in their slaughter. The military governor of the East, a man named Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, saw no other choice. On May 30th, 1967, he declared the Eastern region an independent nation, the Republic of Biafra. It was the ultimate rejection of 1914 amalgamation. It was an attempt to surgically remove a part of the Frankenstein monster, an act of self-preservation. The federal government in Lagos refused to accept it. They called it rebellion. And in July 1967, federal troops invaded. The Nigerian Civil War had begun. For 30 brutal months, the country tore itself apart. The federal government imposed a complete blockade on Biafra. Food couldn't get in, medicine couldn't get in. It led to mass starvation. The images of starving Biafran children shocked the world. By the time the war ended in 1970, as many as 2 million people were dead, most of them civilians. The First Union of 1914 had been held together, but at an almost unimaginable cost. After the war, a new source of wealth was supposed to heal the nation's wound: oil, discovered in the Niger Delta. In the south of the country, oil quickly became the lifeblood of the economy. But instead of healing, it poured salt in the old wounds. Remember that economic model from 1914? Take resources from the south to fund the central state. With oil, that model went into overdrive. Military decrees were passed that gave the federal government 100% ownership of all oil and gas. The money flowed from the Niger Delta to the capital, while the people living on top of the oil wells saw almost none of it. What they did see was the devastation. Over 50 years, an estimated 1.5 million tons of oil had been spilled into the Niger Delta, one of the most polluted places on earth. Farmland poisoned, rivers contaminated, livelihoods destroyed, and in return for generating almost all of the country's wealth, the region got shocking poverty and neglect. When people protested peacefully, like the writer, activist Ken Saro-Wiwa, they were often met with brutal state repression. Saro-Wiwa and 8 of his colleagues were executed in 1995. With peaceful options exhausted, the struggle became violent. Armed groups with names like MEND, the movement of the emancipation of the Niger Delta, emerged. They started blowing up pipelines and kidnapping oil workers, demanding one thing: resource control. A demand to finally break the extractive economic logic that was born in 1914. And that brings us to today. More than a century after the amalgamation and 50 years after the Civil War, the monster's legacy is alive and well. The ghost of Biafra has returned. A powerful movement called IPOB, the indigenous people of Biafra, is again calling for an independent state in the East. They argue that the marginalization and injustice that led to the first war never really went away. And they're not alone. In the West, the Yoruba Nation movement has gained momentum, fueled by rising insecurity and a feeling that the Nigerian state is failing to protect its people. What these movements have in common is that they are fundamentally rejecting the deal made in 1914. They're saying the first marriage has failed and it's time for a divorce. Others are calling for a less drastic solution: restructuring. It's a word you hear everywhere in Nigeria. It's a call to re-engineer the Frankenstein, to send more power and resources back to the states and regions, to negotiate the terms of the union, and to turn the forced marriage back. So, the story of Nigeria isn't just a story of post-independence struggles. It is the story of a colonial creation born out of convenience that has been at war with its own internal contradictions ever since. The lines drawn up on a map in 1914 became the fault lines for a civil war. The economic logic of 1914 became the blueprint for the conflict in the Niger Delta, and the fundamental question of whether so many diverse peoples can truly live together in a single state. A question the British never bothered to ask is still being debated today, sometimes with words and sometimes with weapons. More than a century later, Nigerians are still living with the legacy of Lord Lugard's creation, still trying to figure out how to either tame the monster or finally break free from its grasp. Okay, that's it. Did you enjoy this story? I have many more on YouTube at Popcentral TV, or check our quick article at Instagram carousel for a fast breakdown. If you want to go deeper, go there with our interactive web analysis, or download the full research. PDF, popcentraltv.com. That's where to get it. I'm Olayinka. We'll be bringing you Newsense every day on Popcentral DStv, channel 189. Follow us everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, X. You know what? Just ask me to explain anything, and I'll try. Stay sharp.
Just so you know, this is for information only and not advice. Some details or policies might have changed by the time you're watching this.